Welcome back to the podcast. This is the More Than a Sunday podcast. I'm so glad that you're joining us for episode 3 of our Legacy Lives On season. I encourage you, if you're just listening, please watch on YouTube as well. As you can see, I have awesome guests here with me, and so I just encourage you to watch on YouTube. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited about today because we're continuing on in our Legacy Lives On conversation, and I'm intrigued by who we're talking about. They had 22 ponies, were absolutely obsessed with horses. They lived right next to the church in South Holland, and they had 4 adopted children. Today, we are talking about Paul and Betty Gibson, and I am so excited about it. Now, in Hebrews chapter 11, we read all about the Hall of Faith, and it's all about people who, by faith, have done incredible things for the kingdom of God. And so in this season, this is episode 3, in this season, we're unpacking who kind of laid the groundwork, who would have been considered a Hebrews 11 person who would be in that hall of faith for specifically Faith Church. So today, we're talking about Paul and Betty Gibson, and I am joined by Scott Gibson. Scott, thank you so much for being here. And my friend Jason DeVries, thank you for joining us. Now, Scott, what is your connection to Paul and Betty Gibson?
Okay. So I'm the first born in the family. I was the first one that they snagged in.
Okay.
As you mentioned, we're all adopted. So there's a great story with that, but that's for a different time. But I'm the firstborn.
Okay, firstborn. And Jason, what is your connection? Paul and Betty Gibson.
Yeah, growing up at Faith Church, I knew them. It was a much smaller church then, so everybody knew everybody. So I knew them and knew their family. But when I was a senior in high school, their second son, Dave, had just graduated from college, came back as a high school youth sponsor.
Okay.
And I was a senior. He was coming back. I wasn't looking forward to hanging out with younger students, and he wasn't ready to do that. So we formed a friendship, and that's been 35 years now.
35 years ago.
I know. Yeah, now you make me feel
No,
old when you say it. Yeah,
No,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
great.
When you're like 35, yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. In the beginning, how did the Gibsons get connected to Faith Church specifically?
Okay. So I think it's almost synonymous. Gibson family, Faith Church, back in the day could have been like the same thing. And here's why. Let me tell you why. So they both went to First Reformed Church in South Holland, and then First Reformed Church, they were growing and growing and growing. So there was 13 families that said, you know what, we'll break apart and we'll start another church.
Okay.
So they met in the basement or the gymnasium of McKinley Junior High. All right. So 13 families. Now, when you're starting off a church, it's you got to do everything, right? You have to literally be a part of everything. And so they started a building campaign. Again, this is according to my parents. My grandma Gibson donated the property, and she was part of First Reformed Churches in Holland. So she donates the property for this new church to be started. Okay. So they get that going, right? And then because with only a few members, you've got, like I said, you got to be a part of everything. So my mom taught Sunday school. My dad was a deacon. As I grew older, my job was to keep the church ground. So I mowed the grass, I snow plowed, I shoveled the snow. Church participation was ingrained in us. So, you church twice on Sunday, Wednesday night, sing-alongs, Sunday nights. In fact, we are known for our music here at Faith Church, but even back in the day, right, Faith Church was known for its music. And so other people would sneak away from their churches on Sunday night just to come over to Faith and listen to our quartet and some of the soloists at that time. So very invested in church.
Yeah. So right in the beginning, clearly they were heavily involved. Now, as time went on, what did that involvement look like later down the road?
Well, my dad was always kind of a part of Faith Church's growing, and then also his involvement. So he was a deacon, right? Then he became elder. And then after the eldership, I mean, literally, it's going to be 2 years this month since he's passed away, but which is be July 30th. But back in February of 2 years ago, he was still ushering and greeting people into church. So really up until the day he passed, he's involved in church.
But can I jump in?
Of course.
Yeah. But in thinking about them too, Reg, as we were getting ready for today, I thought back to the time in the 90s when we were making changes. And your parents, highly influential people, and if they would have been against the changes, they could have had a huge influence in stopping those efforts from reaching our community happen. And they had such a heart for younger generations and for people to connect with the Lord that while that may not have been in an official role or capacity, just their support of it and willingness to get behind it and continue to serve it had a huge impact.
Yeah.
So that's actually one of the points that I had in from one of your questions.
Yeah.
Glad to steal it early.
No, so that was good. So it leads me right into it. So
Yeah.
So you can see how much investment my folks put in at the beginning.
Right.
All right. So we get Pastor Bob. He's a young pastor, 30 years old.
Controversial a little bit.
Controversial, wants to make changes, wants to reach people, wants to reach the disconnected and grow the connected. That was our phrase back then.
Beautiful call.
Okay. So we make this move to contemporary music, right? It doesn't sit very well with the people of the older generation, right? It doesn't sit well with them at all. And, my dad was always saying, like, I wish they would just play some hymns. I just wish they'd play some more hymns.
Yeah.
But one important thing, in fact, he says to me, that was his complaint. And now, of anybody in the whole church at that time, we were pretty good. I mean, we were growing rapidly. He could have been disgruntled. He could have been upset. He could have been mad. He could have demanded his church, right? This is my church. How dare you change it, right? I mean,
and others probably were taking that stance.
A lot of them were. In fact, I'll tell you what, his whole Sunday school class, my dad said, I can't even go to Sunday school anymore, Scott, because I can't be around all that negative talk. And so back then, you had to go to a new members class. You'd sit around the table, right? And every table had to have an elder. And, he would just sit there and just be engrossed in the stories that these people would tell him, right? The people tell him. So afterwards, I give him a call on, Sunday, and I say, hey, how'd class go? How'd class go? He goes, Reggie, unbelievable. I get to see these young people coming with their families to know Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I get to see people who have fallen away from the church and they're coming back.
Wow.
And they want to recommit their life back to Jesus. Wow. He says to me, Reggie, how can I complain? How can I complain when I see all this growth and this activity in the church?
Wow.
And he just loved it. Loved it.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah. And supported it.
100%.
Wow.
100%.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So incredibly involved, very influential people, it sounds like. Let's get into the good stuff. I want to know, what are some stories? Bring me back. Let's reminisce for a moment. Act like you're telling me for the first time ever. I don't know what they were like. How did they carry themselves? Why is it that when I went around to our staff and asked who would make the Hall of Faith, why is it that they kept coming up? What are some stories you could tell me?
Okay. So I'm going to kind of lean into my dad a little bit.
Okay.
My dad was a conversationalist. He got to know everybody, because he was a greeter. He got to know so many people. And because of the car dealership, I mean, everyone in South Holland.
What about the car dealership? She probably has no idea what your family did.
So back in the day, there was Gibson Chevrolet.
Okay.
In South Holland. And
Okay.
so his dad started it. Then my dad and his brother took it over.
Okay.
And then it got passed on to myself, Whitey, my two cousins, Jim and Dan. And so,
Got it.
so we were part of the community, not only just Faith Church, the whole community.
Yeah, and a great field for a conversationalist.
So everybody knew Paul Gibson, right?
Okay.
So everybody knew Paul Gibson. So there was this. My dad had Crohn's disease back in the day. So things get lodged in his gut, and he gets a flare up, especially the popcorn. So.
Oh no!
So I can't tell you how many times Pastor Bob, my cousin Dan, Whitey, Mr. Vanderzee, Uncle Nick, and Jack DeYoung, which would be Bob's, father-in-law, would be at the hospital because my dad was in there having an attack. So one time I get a call from my dad. He says, "You got her coming down to the hospital, Scott. I'm in the hospital." Yeah. So I head off to the hospital. Probably meet one of those guys there already. I said, "Dad, what's going on? What's happening?" "Well, I've got a Crohn's attack." "Okay." I said, "Were you eating popcorn?" I don't know. He looks down. I go, "Jack, were you guys eating popcorn today or not?" You better ask your dad. I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, Mom's coming, so that piece of kernel of popcorn in your teeth, you better get rid of it because she's going to know right away." And so, yeah. So, so the moral, here's the moral of this. I thought, here's the moral of the story, right? If you're going to lie, make sure you drag down a fellow brother in Christ with you.
My goodness.
No. Here's the moral. This is the moral of the story. And I thought this was so unique about my dad. The moral of the story is this. I think it's so important that you have a Christian-based community, people that you can hang out with, people that you can go to dinner with. Like I said before, my dad had horses his whole life. And even in Crete, I can't tell you how many couples would come over and they'd go for buggy rides all through the town of Crete. Right? And so, I think it's just really neat that you've got a community that you can pray with, that you can cry with, that you can enjoy life with. In fact, it was a couple of months after my dad passes, and, I was sitting there talking to Bob about our dads, his father-in-law, Jack, and my dad. And Bob goes, "You know what I miss about those two? This is what I miss about Jack and your dad. I miss their joy for life. I miss how happy they were. Like everything they did, they were just laughing and having a good time together." Yeah. And so that's what I would say that would resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the Lord certainly created us to be in community. So it's our true, authentic, who we've been made to be involves other people. So it's a really cool, inspiring lesson that we need to have that community. That's really important to get through the good times and the not so good times.
Absolutely.
What about some stories that you remember, Jason?
Yeah. Well, one, I would say, I don't know if I ever recall your mom and dad showing up to the same event in the same car, right? I mean, they were extremely independent people and it worked for them. I mean, she continued to work forever. She was a nurse and took care of people. So when he wasn't taking care of his health, that's why she would get upset.
Yeah.
So they just had a marriage that worked for them. And they didn't feel like they had pressure to be like anybody else.
Wow.
And when I do premarital counseling, I tell couples, like, hey, I know couples that never spent a night apart. And then I know couples that never arrived in the same car to the same event.
Yeah.
And couples need to figure out who they are. And, that was Paul and Bet. But then, I would say the hospitality and you were never a stranger and the generosity that your parents showed, if they had something, they shared it. And so, I was just telling Whitey the other day who, now I thought about it getting ready for this, that we've been married, we've been friends for 35 years now. And, your family had a cottage in Michigan and there was one summer I was there every weekend.
Wow.
And then Labor Day, we pull the pier out. It's closing up for the winter. And as I'm getting ready to go back to college, your mom says, "Hey, Jason, you know where the key is. You can come here anytime." The cottage was an hour from where I was going to college. But who gives the key and access to their cottage to a college kid, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, come do what you want here.
Wow.
And so, I mean, just that kind of generosity. And yeah, I mean, the fact that I call your aunts and uncles aunt and uncle because it was such a warm and friendly and welcoming family that it was like, yeah, come in. It was never the table was closed. There was always room to make the circle bigger.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, what an inspiring story. That's really sweet. Anything else that you remember that you want to share about them?
Let me think.
How did they carry themselves? If they walked into the room, what were they bringing with them?
Yeah, you know, my dad had this car dealership, right?
Yeah.
But you would never know that he had means, right? You would never. In fact, it was not.
That's okay.
For this commercial timeout, this podcast brought to you by.
It's okay.
He would literally. He would in Chevrolet meetings. He would literally. I said, "Dad, you've got horse manure on your boots." Yeah, so what? You know, I have horses. So like he was not out to impress. He was not out to put on the show. He was not out to make you say, "Hey, here am I." You know, he's walking around. And these are the big wigs of General Motors.
Yeah.
And he's got horse manure sticking on the bottom of his shoe.
Yeah,
which
right.
just cracked me up. I said, Go ahead. You know?
What's the deeper meaning to that? Why? Because everyone is so concerned about how they look and what their reputation is, what the perception is. Why is that? What did he know his identity that well that he wasn't concerned about what others thought about him?
You know, this was one of his phrases. Up until even the end, he goes, "Scott, I can't tell you how blessed I am. The Lord just has blessed me."
Wow.
In fact, you know, I can't really wait I'm ready to go home. I want to go. I'm ready to go. I don't know, you know, even it was about a month or so before he passed. He goes, "I don't think the Lord wants me. For some reason, I can't get up there yet," you know? Because, you know, he knew that this place wasn't his home, and he just wanted to be with the Lord. But he always would say, "I've just been blessed. I've had a blessed life."
Wow.
And so I always remember that phrase, you know?
Just an eternal perspective.
Just an eternal person. In fact, I used it at his service. He literally lived out, you know, when Bob did a sermon, live with 1 foot raised. 1 foot here, 1 foot ready to jump up.
Yeah.
And I mean, my dad personified that slogan, I think, living with one foot raised.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's lean a little bit more into Betty now. Tell me about Betty. Is there anything specific that you want to share about her?
Well, it wasn't until later on, you know, in life that I finally had the guts to ask her about the adoptions, right? And so she you know, I can remember what she shared with me. She said, you know, back then, Scott, you know, South Holland was pretty tight core, tight knit, and everyone knew, you know, our struggle, and it's not easy. It's not easy being the only mom, the only woman who's not having children yet. And so she says, for a time, that was really hard for me. But even in her spirit, she said, you know what, Lord, whatever you want, you know, I pray that you give it to me.
Wow.
Whatever it is, you know, and if we have to adopt, you know, we're going to adopt.
Yeah.
And I know the story. Each one of us kids has a story, which is just really, it blows you away. And then my mom took on each one of our stories as her own. And, you know, I mean, you know, in fact, one of my good friends, Paul Lagasty, when we were at coffee, he goes, you know what, Reggie, if you think about it, of all the people, of all the parents, of all the places you could have went, you got Paul and Betty.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Paul was named after my father. That's what, you know, Paul, like, that's what his mom said to me one time too. He goes, so of all the people, you got these two.
Yeah, what
you
a
know,
blessing.
you're like, you know, I'm realizing it. I kind of always knew it.
Yeah, they were
but
special.
boy, it's really, now that they're gone, it's really hitting home more and more for me.
Special
you know?
people. What an inspiring story of, you know, not my will, but yours be done.
And this was another thing I want to tell you about my mom too.
Yeah.
So when I went back to college, she went to work at Rest Haven,
Okay. Rest Haven. What?
which was a Christian
Nursing
community
home.
nursing home
Okay.
for elderly folks.
Okay.
And I remember saying, Mom, you know, you could make twice as much money working at a hospital, right? You could make more money.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, I know, Scott, but you know, I feel like I'm called here. I want to make sure that in the last season of these people's lives, they get good care, good health care. I want to watch out for them. And I want to be able to talk to their family members and let them know that they're going to be cared for. So when they leave and go home tonight, they don't have to worry.
Yeah.
You know, I've got it covered. And I always thought that was really, it was really, just blew me away of how my mom had that perspective. And then, you know, 30 days after my dad passes, my mom passes.
Oh, really?
So it was July 30th and August 30th, 2 years ago. And my mom was in charge of the floor. She was a head nurse. And at her wake, like 12, now she hasn't worked at Rest Haven for probably 25 some years.
Yeah.
12 women come here to Dyer, and they just want to say how much they appreciated working for and then with and under my mom's, you know, authority.
Wow. So huge impact there.
Huge impact. I'm like, man, you guys, this has been a long time
Yeah,
ago, you know?
yeah.
We wanted you to know how much we appreciated your mom and how good of a person that she was. You know, I'm like, wow. Okay.
Oh, so power couple.
Okay. Power couple,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
What a duo. That's awesome. Do you remember anything specific about Betty?
Well, I mean, to that power couple, what I would just say is I think they were equally strong, right? I mean, she was no shrinking violet. She stood up for herself.
Yeah.
She had an opinion. She would share that. And, you know, you talk about she could make more at a hospital. She probably didn't need to work at all, right?
Right.
And yet she was doing that. And not even just Monday through Friday on the best shifts. She was on weekends, and she took those times in order to serve people and to serve those families. And again, doing that even when the family had the cottage. So not able to go every week and to do those things. And
It was a sacrifice.
yeah. And so they both had extreme ministry that they did and gave their lives away. And to their grandkids, their kids and grandkids. They loved their families. Your dad wasn't just going to the baseball and basketball and softball games so that he could eat the food he wasn't supposed to, although he liked that.
Yeah.
But, you know, just loved supporting and loving on their kids and grandkids.
Wow. Yeah. So the two of them, let's talk about maybe when there was a struggle. How was that dance? Would one be able to kind of hold down the fort when the other one was going through a trial, or how did that dynamic work in a family aspect?
Wow, that's a great question. You mean if it was between the two of them?
Yeah, or it's just in life. If one of them's going through a hard time, would the other lift?
Well,
them
like
up?
Jason mentioned, first of all, so Jason mentioned, you know, when my dad would get sick, he probably had more ailments, sickness things than my mom by far.
Okay.
And instantly, in fact, honestly, I believe my mom should have probably been gone 7 years before my dad with her disease. But I think she just felt like she needed to stick around and take care of my dad.
Yeah.
Even though she really couldn't,
Yeah.
she felt that way. And so when my dad would get, his appendix out, or he, would get shingles, or when he had, his Crohn's attacks, or whatever was going on with him, his shoulder issues. And she always, picked it up and became the nurse.
Yeah.
Nurse Betty.
So they served each other too.
They served each other. When it was between the two of them, I always noticed, and this is what I've got to do better at, in marriage. My dad always seemed to just kind of, okay, he'd get quiet and he would take the back seat,
Yeah.
and then just let it play out. I didn't remember like arguments
Yeah.
and that bickering going on. I just don't remember
He
that.
kind of took more of a soft
Just took this.
approach.
Let's just back it down, and we'll
Yeah.
let life go from there.
Yeah.
That's what I remember. So
That's awesome.
yeah,
So looking back, what is legacy? What is their legacy specifically? And then let's go broad. What does legacy, that word, what does that mean? Let's start with Paul and Betty. What is their legacy, if you had to sum it up?
I'm going to tell you a story about
Okay.
their legacy. Okay,
Let's
I'm going
do
to tell you a story. In fact, it almost fits in. It almost fits in with the times we are in today.
Okay.
And I put this on paper. This came to my thought before what happened on Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay. So we all know what happened on Saturday.
But we don't know when this is going to air, so you
Okay.
better remind
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
who's listening or watching what
Let's give a
what
small
Saturday
recap. Okay,
was.
So on Saturday, there was an assassination attempt on maybe to be former President Trump.
Yep.
Okay, so with that being said, back in 2020, there was an election between two candidates. All right, so my dad is my mom and dad are in kind of like a town home, and their neighbor, Steve, and there was just this great, neighborly affection for each other. They would come over and they would, have coffee in the garage, or they'd share a can of pop, or when they're on the street, they'd wave to one another. And they were just, back and forth. They would just, be in each other's lives. Okay, here comes the election, right? Everybody puts signs in their windows. They put signs in the grass. Uh-oh. Coming to find out that my dad and my mom and dad and the neighbor have opposing views on who's to be elected for presidency. All of a sudden, coffee time stops. The wave down the road stops. My dad he knows there's tension, right? There's tension.
Yeah.
And so what do you think? What do you think? What do you think my dad did? What do you think my dad did?
Your dad?
Yeah, what do you think my dad did? I'll put it on you. I'll put it on you, Dad.
I think, knowing what I've heard about him, I think he rang the doorbell on a nice Saturday morning and said, "Let's have breakfast together and work it out."
Close.
Good guess, Allie. Good guess. Good guess.
He went a little. Here's a little deeper.
Okay.
My dad decides to take down his signs. Takes all the signs down.
Okay.
Never forget it. Of course, I come over and I'm ticked.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Where'd your signs go? How come you took your signs down? We got to get them signs back up,
Yeah.
And very calmly, very gently, my dad, he looks at me and he says, "Scott, you know what? These two guys don't matter. There's only one person who matters." And I knew who he was talking about. Wow. He's talking about the person of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
He knew it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth the fight. Sure enough, takes his signs down. Steve's coming back over again.
Wow.
My dad would invite Steve to church. Him and his wife were Catholic.
Okay.
They'd come on Saturday nights once in a while. Now the neighborly love kind of regained momentum again. When my dad got sick, Steve and his wife said, "Hey, what can we do? Can we bring him a meal?" I said, "If you just check on him once in a while, maybe bring the garbage out, knock on the door, just make sure they're okay, because we're not here,
Yeah.
We're close, but we're not here." He says, "No problem, no problem." At my dad's service, the gospel was preached, and I can remember saying, in that service that, hey, this is one thing my dad knew. He knew that good people don't go to heaven, right? People that give out a lot of money, who love their neighbor as themselves, or treat the world morally right, that's not the one that goes to heaven.
Yeah.
The person who goes to heaven is the person who knows, not just knowledge of, but who knows Jesus, who has a relationship with Jesus Christ. He knew that. And he wanted Steve to know that.
Yeah.
So after the service, Steve comes up and says, man, that was a really, nice service we had for your dad. And I really think this Jesus thing is starting to settle in. I think I'm starting to get it. 6 months later, Steve passes away. He dies of a heart attack. Here's one thing I can tell you. If we leave those signs in, right? I don't know what happened to Steve. I have no idea. Only God knows.
Right.
But you leave those signs in, right? You stay connected to the earth. It may be a different story, but I'm praying and hoping that because my dad took the signs out, that you know what, Steve has a different eternity today.
Wow.
My mom and dad both agreed. Get them signs out. Take them out. Get them signs out of the yard.
It's not worth it.
It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Not in an eternal realm. Not in an eternal thought.
Yeah.
Right. Today, maybe an earthly thought. If your hope is in a man or a woman, fine. But if you don't have your hope in Jesus, man, let's just turn the whole thing off. Wow. So I don't know if you knew that or not, but
I didn't. That's great.
That's definitely timely.
Yeah.
That's a great.
And timely. I'm like, I can't believe this. I can't believe it.
Oh, thank you. So. Jason, what would you say is legacy? When you hear of legacy, what does that mean?
Yeah, when I think of legacy, I think that's impact beyond our time on earth. That it's not only what you are remembered for, but it is something that has so impacted those that come after you that they live differently. So, when I've talked about the radical hospitality that Paul and Betts had, I see that not only being lived out in the families of their descendants, but that impacts me.
Yeah.
And, that mindset of, hey, if I have it, I'll share it. It's yours, and I think too, the humility, like you talked about, it was never about them. It was never pointing to them. They always pointed to Jesus. And so I think about that legacy. And to me, those are elements I think of when it comes to Paul and Betty Gibson's legacy.
Wow. Let's move to one final question, and I don't want you to overthink it too much. But we're just gonna. It's a grand question, but we can make it simple. Okay. What would Paul and Betty want everyone to know? I'll start with you, Reggie.
Okay.
If they were sitting here and they knew they had a microphone.
Well, first of all, first and foremost is they would, and I've alluded to it already. You've got to know Jesus Christ. That would be immeasurably the most important thing that you've got to know. You've got to know. It all starts with Jesus. Yeah. If you can't get Jesus right, then the rest of it is who cares about legacy? Yeah. It's not going to matter. You've got to get Jesus right. The second thing is have good church community. Have a good church community of friends. Be involved in your church. Hang out with church people who can bring you up, people who can go through the desert storms of life and who also can go through the rainbow times of life. Yeah. Have a good, church community base. And then it would end with this, I think. This would be my third point, my third one. How you live Sunday, do it Monday through Saturday. And I think we've pointed to the fact, what you do, how you sing, how you live life, how you present on Sunday, present that on Monday through Saturday. Be the same person that you are on the Sabbath, right? When you come through these doors in Dyer or whichever facility you go to,
Yep.
do that out here. And I think both my folks presented that well. They, in real life, they both could have, they both gave up the right to themselves
Yeah.
so that others could come to know the Lord, right? Whether it was I could have made more money at a hospital, but I chose not to.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't even have to work here.
Yeah.
Right? To taking down signs. It's my right to vote for who I want to, but you know what? I got to get this guy presented to Jesus. He's got to know Jesus first.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's what they did. They lived that Sabbath. They lived their Sunday throughout the week.
Yeah. What I love about that is knowing that it wasn't just one time that they both said, you know what? I'm going to sacrifice what I have and I'm going to turn to Jesus and live this humble life. And then it was over. It's this continual thing. They were constantly having to do that. It's not one big 180. It's just these, are we turning slightly? Are we getting a little bit more like Jesus every day?
Talk about legacy. I want to leave. I think if I don't know if you worry about legacy, don't live for the legacy, live for Jesus, and the legacy will follow.
Yeah.
The legacy will happen.
Yeah.
When my kids remember, they remember my mother-in-law, they remember grandma, my mom, and so that all take. If the Lord puts a memory into your brain to remember something about somebody, great. But here's maybe a definition I didn't think of. It's been 2 years. I'm still amazed at my mom and dad's life. Maybe legacy is anybody going to be amazed at Reggie Gibson? I don't know. Well, my wife or my kids, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, if you can still be amazed at somebody 2 years later, 5 years, or whatever it is, if you remember, wow, that was amazing. Okay, you left a legacy.
Yeah.
And they didn't try, right? They didn't try. It wasn't their goal. Just trying to be Jesus out there in the world.
Yeah. Do you think that being Jesus has more to do with what you're doing or how you're making people feel?
I think it's one and the same. If you do Jesus, you're going to make somebody feel better.
I see.
Because that's what Jesus, did. When the people come in contact with Jesus, they always left different.
Changed.
They always left changed, right? They always left more excited about life. In fact, they'd run away trying to tell people about what they just experienced.
Yeah.
Right? So they're kind of I would say they're one and the same. Good answer?
Yeah, in that order, I think they go together. Yeah. But I think in reverse order, they don't.
Okay.
Because if you just make people feel good, but you don't do anything for it, then it seems a little empty to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe both.
Yeah. If you do it in that order, if you're there about them, they are going to feel better. If you're helping them, serving them. But if you do it the other way, I just want to make you feel good.
Yeah. No. Right.
And that's right. Again, that's
good
one of
point.
one of the strong parts about your mom and dad is that the actions were right there with it.
Yeah. True.
So both.
What he said. Good answer. Good answer, Jason.
So good. Is there anything else that you would love to share about them? I've had a great time. Thank you so much for sharing about your parents.
Yeah, no, it's always good to reflect. Like I said, it's coming up. It's coming up for their anniversary of leaving this world and going to the next place.
What a joy.
Wow. No, it's all good.
Well, we would love if you would join the conversation. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your answers. I have a question for the viewers right now. If you're watching on YouTube, please comment in the comment section. If you're listening somewhere else, you can always DM us on Instagram at WeAreFaith. The question for you today is, what are you doing right now, in this moment, in these days, currently? What are you doing that might change your future? What are you doing to serve people? How are you making them feel as you're serving them? We want to hear from you. We want you to join the conversation. So comment in the comment section or DM us on Instagram. Jason, Reggie, thank you for joining me. This was a joy for me.
Thank you, Allie.
It was so good to hear about Paul and Betty.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. And we hope to see you on the next episode of More Than a Sunday.